"Son, that waitress cared for me at the nursing home." What she revealed next devastated the millionaire. The fluorescent lights of Rosie's diner hummed their familiar tune at 5:47 a.m., casting their pale glow over the worn linoleum floors and the red vinyl booths that had seen better decades. Kelly Morrison tied her apron with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it exactly 247 times before. She knew the number because she'd started counting on her first day, 19 months ago, when this job felt like rock bottom. Now it just felt like survival. She was 26 years old, and her entire life fit into a studio apartment that cost her $1,150 a month in a neighborhood where gunshots occasionally punctuated the night. She had $342.17 in her checking account, $47,000 in student loan debt from a nursing degree she'd never finished, and a collection of memories that haunted her in the quiet hours between the dinner rush and closing time. To understand who Kelly really was, you had to go back 3 years, to a nursing home called Sunrise Gardens in Westchester, where a 23-year-old nursing assistant named Kelly had worked the overnight shift caring for elderly patients that the world had forgotten. The pay was $14.75 an hour, $5. The hours were brutal, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 5 nights a week. The work was the kind that broke most people within 6 months, changing adult diapers, cleaning up accidents, listening to patients cry for family members who never came, watching the slow decay of minds and bodies that had once been vibrant and full of life. But Kelly had loved it. Not the work itself. Nobody loved cleaning bedpans at 3 a.m., but the people. The patients who still had stories to tell if anyone bothered to listen. The moments of connection that happened in the darkness, when fear and loneliness stripped away all pretense and left only raw, beautiful humanity. There was one patient in particular who had changed everything. Eleanor Bennett had arrived at Sunrise Gardens on a rainy Tuesday in March, looking like a woman who had simply given up on living. She was 73 years old, diagnosed with early-stage dementia, and according to her intake paperwork, she had no family, no emergency contacts, no one who would notice if she slipped away in the night. Kelly noticed. She noticed the way Eleanor's hands trembled when she tried to hold a cup of water. She noticed the photographs Eleanor kept hidden under her pillow. Pictures of a little boy with dark hair and serious eyes, growing up frame by frame into a young man Kelly had never seen visit. She noticed how Eleanor would whisper a name in her sleep over and over. "Marcus, Marcus, I'm sorry." For 14 months, Kelly was Eleanor's anchor to the world. She would sit with her during the worst nights, when the dementia made Eleanor forget where she was and panic would seize her fragile body. She would brush her thin white hair and tell her she was safe, that she was loved, that someone was there. She would read to her from the romance novels Eleanor adored, trashy paperbacks with shirtless men on the covers that made the old woman's eyes light up with something like joy. And slowly, piece by piece, Eleanor had told her the story of the son who had abandoned her. "He was everything to me," Eleanor had said one night, her lucid moments becoming rarer and more precious. "I raised him alone after his father left, worked 3 jobs to put him through school, and he became so successful, Kelly. So successful. But somewhere along the way he forgot where he came from. He forgot me." Kelly had held her hand and said nothing because what was there to say? "He paid for this place," Eleanor had continued, her voice cracking. "Every month a check arrives, but he hasn't visited in 4 years, not once. He thinks money is the same as love. He thinks if he pays for my care, he doesn't have to actually care." That was when Kelly had started to hate Marcus Bennett. She had never met him, had only seen his face in those photographs Eleanor treasured like holy relics. But she hated him with the kind of fierce protective anger that surprised her. How could anyone abandon their mother? How could anyone reduce a lifetime of sacrifice to a monthly wire transfer and a clear conscience? But then everything had fallen apart. Sunrise Gardens had been bought by a healthcare conglomerate that decided profits mattered more than patients. They had cut staff, reduced hours, eliminated unnecessary services like the late-night reading sessions Kelly provided. When Kelly had complained to the new management about patient care, she had been fired on the spot. "You're not a nurse," the administrator had told her coldly. "You're a nursing assistant, easily replaceable. And frankly, Miss Morrison, your attitude is not a good fit for our new corporate culture. She had been escorted out of the building without being allowed to say goodbye to her patients, without being allowed to say goodbye to Eleanor. That had been 19 months ago, and Kelly had thought about Eleanor every single day since. She had tried calling the facility, but they wouldn't transfer calls to patients. She had tried visiting, but her name had been flagged in the system as terminated employee, no access. She had written letters, but she had no way of knowing if Eleanor ever received them. The not knowing was the worst part. Was Eleanor still alive? Had her dementia progressed? Did she think Kelly had abandoned her too, just like her son? The guilt of that possibility kept Kelly awake at night, staring at the water stains on her ceiling, wondering if somewhere in Westchester an old woman was crying for a friend who would never come. But rent was $1,150 a month, and student loans were $523 a month, and groceries were whatever she could afford after tips. So Kelly put on her apron every morning at 5:47 a.m. and smiled at customers who rarely smiled back, and tried not to think about all the ways life had disappointed her. The morning shift was the hardest. From 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., Kelly worked the breakfast and lunch crowd. Office workers grabbing coffee, construction crews ordering eggs and bacon, retirees who nursed single cups of decaf for hours because they had nowhere else to be and no one waiting for them at home. She knew all their orders by heart. Table 4 was 3 eggs scrambled, wheat toast, black coffee, extra napkins. Table 7 was a Denver omelet with home fries, and please God, don't forget the hot sauce this time. The booth by the window was Earl, 78 years old, widower, former accountant, who ordered the same thing every day, French toast with a side of bacon, and always left exactly $3, $50 in tip on a $12. 75 check. Kelly appreciated Earl. She appreciated all her regulars, these small anchors in the chaos of her days. They reminded her that routine could be a comfort, that there was dignity in showing up, that sometimes the most important thing you could do for another person was simply remember their name and how they liked their eggs. It was 12:47 p.m. on a Thursday when everything changed. The lunch rush was winding down, and Kelly was wiping down table 11 when the door chimed and 2 people walked in. An elderly woman in a wheelchair, pushed by a man in a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Kelly's rent. Kelly's heart stopped. The woman had white hair now, thinner than before, and her face had the hollow look of someone who had weathered hard years. But Kelly would have recognized her anywhere. The curve of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she was curious. The small crescent-shaped scar on her left hand from a childhood accident she had described in vivid detail one sleepless night at Sunrise Gardens. Eleanor Bennett. Alive. Here. In a diner in Brooklyn, 47 miles from the nursing home where Kelly had last seen her. Kelly's hands began to shake. The rag she was holding fell to the floor and she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the woman who had occupied her thoughts for 19 months of guilt and grief and wondering. And then she looked at the man pushing the wheelchair. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair silvering slightly at the temples despite looking no older than his mid-30s. His jawline was sharp, his eyes were gray, and there was something in his expression, a weariness, a heaviness, that seemed at odds with the obvious wealth his clothing represented. Kelly knew that face. She had seen it in a dozen photographs, watched it age from gap-toothed child to serious teenager to young man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. She had traced its lines in the pictures Eleanor kept under her pillow, hating this stranger who couldn't be bothered to visit his own mother. Marcus Bennett, the son who had abandoned Eleanor, the man Kelly had resented for 19 months without ever meeting him. He was here, in her diner, with the mother he supposedly didn't have time for. Kelly's mind raced with 1,000 questions, 1,000 accusations, 1,000 versions of the confrontation she had imagined having with this man, if she ever got the chance. But before she could speak, before she could move, Eleanor looked up from her wheelchair and their eyes met across the diner, across them. Recognition flickered across the old woman's face like sunlight breaking through clouds. Kelly. Eleanor's voice was frailer than Kelly remembered, but there was no mistaking the spark of joy in her eyes. "Kelly, is that you?" Marcus looked down at his mother, then at the waitress standing frozen in the middle of the diner. His brow furrowed in confusion. "Mom, do you know her?" Eleanor reached out with trembling hands, tears already streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Know her? Marcus, this is Kelly, my Kelly, the angel who saved my life. And before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave your city in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe for more. Now let's see what happens next." Marcus Bennett had not planned on being here. 20 minutes ago, he had been in his corner office on the 47th floor of Bennett Technologies headquarters in Manhattan, staring at quarterly reports that showed his company's value had grown to $2.3 billion. His calendar was packed with meetings, a 2 p.m. call with investors in Singapore, a 3:30 review of the acquisition proposal for a competitor, a dinner at 7 with 3 senators who wanted to discuss technology policy and probably wanted campaign donations more. He had built an empire from nothing. Well, not nothing, from his mother's sacrifice, though that was something he had tried very hard not to think about for the past 4 years. Then his phone had rung, and the name on the caller ID had made his heart stop. Sunrise Gardens Nursing Home. "Mr. Bennett, this is Diane Chen, the new director at Sunrise Gardens. I'm calling about your mother." Marcus had gripped the edge of his $15,000 mahogany desk so hard his knuckles turned white. "Is she okay? What happened?" "She's fine, Mr. Bennett. Actually, she's better than fine. That's why I'm calling." A pause, and then words that had shattered everything Marcus thought he knew. "Mr. Bennett, your mother's dementia symptoms have been misdiagnosed for years. Our new neurologist reviewed her case last month, and she's been suffering from a treatable condition called normal pressure hydrocephalus. With the right medication and therapy, she's recovered remarkably. She's lucid again, she remembers everything." Marcus had sat in silence for a full 30 seconds, unable to process what he was hearing. "Mr. Bennett, are you there?" "You're telling me," he had said slowly, each word feeling like broken glass in his throat, "that my mother has been lucid for a month, and no one called me until now. I apologize for the delay. The previous administration had unusual protocols. I've only been here 3 weeks myself. But Mr. Bennett, your mother has been asking for you. Every day. She wants to see you. She wants to see you." Those words had played on a loop in Marcus's head as he canceled every meeting on his calendar, as he drove his $180,000 car to Westchester in a haze of shock and guilt, as he walked through the doors of Sunrise Gardens for the first time in 4 years. 4 years. 47 months. 1,431 days since he had last seen his mother's face. He had told himself he was doing the right thing by staying away. The doctors had said her dementia was progressing rapidly. They had said she didn't recognize anyone anymore, that visits only confused and agitated her, that she would be better off in the care of professionals. And Marcus, drowning in work and grief and the crushing weight of an empire he had never asked to build, had believed them. Or maybe he had wanted to believe them. Because the truth Marcus had buried so deep he almost forgot it existed, was that he couldn't bear to watch his mother disappear. Eleanor Bennett had been his entire world. His father had left when Marcus was 7, walking out the door one Tuesday morning and never coming back. No note, no explanation, no contact for the next 30 years. Just gone, like Marcus and Eleanor meant nothing. Eleanor had held their family together with sheer willpower and 3 different jobs. She cleaned houses during the day, waitressed at night, and took in sewing on the weekends. She worked herself to exhaustion so Marcus could have school supplies and soccer cleats and eventually, impossibly, a scholarship to MIT that changed everything. "You're going to change the world, my beautiful boy," she had told him the day he left for college, pressing $47 into his palm. Every dollar she had saved from tips that month. "And don't you dare look back. Don't you dare let anything hold you back, not even me." He had taken her words too literally. Marcus had built Bennett Technologies from a dorm room startup to a global powerhouse. He had become a billionaire by 30, a legend in Silicon Valley by 32, and somewhere in that meteoric rise he had lost track of the woman who made it all possible. It started small. A missed Sunday dinner here, a canceled birthday visit there, phone calls that became shorter and more sporadic as the company consumed his every waking hour. Then came the diagnosis. Eleanor had been 69 when the doctors at Sunrise Gardens told Marcus his mother had early-onset dementia, progressive, irreversible. She would slowly lose her memories, her personality, her ability to recognize the people she loved. Something in Marcus had broken that day. He had always planned to make it up to her, always assumed there would be time to slow down, to visit more, to tell her how grateful he was for everything she had sacrificed. But dementia didn't care about plans. Dementia stole his mother piece by piece while Marcus watched helplessly from the sidelines. So he had done what he knew how to do. He wrote checks, $1,750 a month for the best care money could buy. Private room, round-the-clock nursing, every medical intervention available. And he stopped visiting because every visit was a knife to the heart. Watching his mother look at him with blank eyes, not recognizing the son she had given everything for, that was a pain Marcus couldn't survive. So he had chosen the coward's way out. He had paid strangers to care for her so he wouldn't have to watch her die in slow motion. But she hadn't been dying. She had been misdiagnosed, treatable, recoverable, and Marcus had abandoned her anyway. The guilt of that realization had hit him like a physical blow when he walked into Sunrise Gardens and saw his mother sitting in the common room, reading a book, looking up at him with eyes that were clear and sharp and filled with so much love it almost destroyed him. "Marcus," she had said, her voice steady and strong. "You came." He had fallen to his knees beside her wheelchair and cried like he hadn't cried since his father walked out. He had apologized over and over, words tumbling out in an incoherent stream of grief and shame. He had held her hands, thinner than he remembered, marked with age spots and the crescent-shaped scar from when she burned herself making him pancakes on his 8th birthday, and begged her to forgive him. "There's nothing to forgive," Eleanor had said, stroking his hair the way she used to when he was a frightened little boy. "You were lied to. We were both lied to. The only thing that matters now is that you're here." But there was something to forgive. Marcus knew it, even if his mother was too kind to say it. 4 years. He had paid $1,750 a month, over $800,000 total, to avoid spending an afternoon with his own mother. He had convinced himself he was being responsible, practical, merciful. He had told himself that his work was more important than anything, that he was changing the world, that his mother would want him to succeed. All lies. Comfortable lies that let him bury his guilt under 14-hour workdays and billion-dollar deals. Now his mother was lucid again, and Marcus had to face the man he had become. He had taken her out of Sunrise Gardens that very day, signed all the paperwork, packed her belongings, settled her into the guest suite of his penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side. He had cleared his calendar for the next 2 weeks, something he hadn't done in 7 years, and devoted himself to making up for lost time. Eleanor had wanted to go somewhere simple for lunch, not the $300 a plate restaurant where Marcus usually entertained clients, not the private club where tech billionaires discussed market disruption over Wagyu beef. She wanted a diner. "Like the one where I used to work," she had said, her eyes soft with memory. "Do you remember, Marcus? The night shift at Sal's, when you were little? You used to do your homework in the back booth while I waited tables." Marcus remembered. He remembered the smell of coffee and bacon grease, the sound of the jukebox playing oldies, the way his mother's feet would swell after an 8-hour shift, but she never complained, not once. So he had found this place, Rosie's Diner in Brooklyn, and pushed his mother's wheelchair through the door, and then a waitress had dropped her rag on the floor, and his mother had started crying, and everything Marcus thought he understood about the past 4 years had suddenly become much more complicated. "My Kelly," Eleanor was saying now, reaching toward the frozen waitress with trembling hands. "Oh my God, Kelly. They told me you left. They told me you didn't want to say goodbye." "Kelly," The waitress was named Kelly, and from the way she was staring at his mother, with tears streaming down her face and a look of such profound relief and love, Marcus knew that whatever story was about to unfold, it was going to change everything. "Mrs. Bennett," Kelly whispered, finally moving forward. She knelt beside the wheelchair, taking Eleanor's hands in hers with a tenderness that made something twist in Marcus's chest. "I didn't leave. They fired me. I tried to come back. I tried to call. I wrote you letters." "I never got any letters," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. "They told me you had quit. They said you found a better job and didn't want to work with old people anymore." "That's a lie." Kelly's voice was fierce now, protective in a way that made Marcus feel like an intruder in a reunion he didn't understand. "I would never have left you. You are." She stopped, overcome with emotion. Marcus stood frozen, watching this stranger cry over his mother, watching his mother cry over this stranger. And slowly, horribly, he began to realize that in the 4 years he had been absent from his mother's life, someone else had been there. Someone who actually showed up. Someone who actually cared. Someone who, unlike Marcus, hadn't needed a $1,700 monthly check to love Eleanor Bennett. The guilt that had been eating at Marcus since this morning suddenly doubled in weight. He had abandoned his mother, convinced himself he was doing the right thing, and meanwhile this young woman, this waitress in a worn apron and sensible shoes, had been the one holding his mother's hand in the darkness. "Kelly," Eleanor said, her lucid eyes meeting the younger woman's gaze. "There's so much I need to tell you. So much you don't know." She glanced up at her son, and Marcus saw something in her expression he couldn't quite read. "Marcus, this is the woman who saved my life, who kept me alive during the worst years, who read to me every night and told me I was loved when I couldn't remember my own name." Marcus looked at Kelly, really looked at her for the first time. She was pretty in an unpolished way, with brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and green eyes red-rimmed from crying. Her uniform was clean but clearly well worn. Her shoes had the kind of scuff marks that came from thousands of hours on her feet. She was looking at him with an expression he recognized, barely concealed hostility. This woman, whoever she was, hated him. And as he stood in a Brooklyn diner watching a stranger comfort his mother with the easy intimacy of genuine love, Marcus realized that she probably had every right to. Kelly's manager, a heavy-set woman named Doris who had been running Rosie's diner for 23 years, appeared from behind the counter with a look of concern. "Kelly, honey, is everything okay? You've got customers waiting at table 6. Kelly wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Doris, this is someone I used to care for, at the nursing home." Doris looked at Eleanor, then at the expensive suit on the man pushing her wheelchair, and made a quick calculation. "Take your break early, sweetheart. I'll cover your tables." "Thank you." Kelly turned back to Eleanor, still kneeling on the diner floor. "Mrs. Bennett, can we talk? There's so much I need to tell you, so much that happened after they fired me." Marcus cleared his throat, feeling suddenly like a third wheel in a reunion that had nothing to do with him. "Maybe we should all sit down. Mom, you haven't eaten yet." They settled into a corner booth, Eleanor on one side with Kelly, Marcus across from them, feeling the weight of the younger woman's hostility every time her green eyes flickered in his direction. "The night I was fired," Kelly began, her voice low and steady, "I went straight to HR to argue. I told them you needed me, that I was the only one who could calm you down during the bad episodes. Do you know what they said?" Eleanor shook her head, her thin fingers wrapped around Kelly's hand like a lifeline. "They said I was too emotionally invested, that I was treating you like family instead of a patient, that my boundary issues were making the other staff uncomfortable." Kelly's voice cracked with old anger. "Boundary issues, because I actually cared about you." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had chosen Sunrise Gardens because it had the best ratings, the most impressive facilities, the highest price tag. He had assumed that expensive meant excellent. He had never once questioned whether the people providing the care actually gave a damn about their patients. "After they fired you," Eleanor said softly, Everything got worse. The new night staff, they didn't talk to me. They didn't read to me. They would come in, do their jobs, and leave. Like I was furniture, like I didn't matter. I tried so hard to reach you, Kelly said. I called every day for a month. They kept saying you couldn't come to the phone, that you were unavailable. I wrote letters. I must have written 15 letters, but I never got a single response. I never saw a single letter. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Marcus thought about the $7,500 he paid every month, about the quarterly reports he received, filled with clinical jargon about patient stability and care protocols. Not once had anyone mentioned that his mother had lost the one person who actually made her feel loved. Not once had anyone told him that his money was funding isolation instead of care. I would have done anything to see you again, Kelly continued. But I couldn't afford a lawyer to fight the wrongful termination. I couldn't afford to drive out to Westchester every weekend hoping they'd let me through the door. I was barely surviving. She laughed bitterly. I still am barely surviving. But I never stopped thinking about you, Mrs. Bennett. Every single day. Call me Eleanor, the old woman said, squeezing Kelly's hand. You've earned that right. Marcus watched this exchange with a growing sense of shame. This waitress, earning what, maybe $30,000 a year with tips, had done more for his mother than he had with all his billions. She had given time, presence, love. He had given money and called it enough. I owe you an apology, Marcus said suddenly, the words coming out before he could stop them. Both women turned to look at him. Kelly's expression remained guarded, but there was a flicker of surprise in her eyes. I should have visited, he continued, forcing himself to meet her gaze. I should have checked on her myself instead of trusting reports from strangers. I told myself it was too painful to watch her decline, but that was just cowardice. And while I was hiding behind my checkbook, you were actually there for her. Kelly said nothing for a long moment. Then, you stopped visiting 4 years ago. Your mother cried about that every night. Every single night she would whisper your name in her sleep and wake up asking if you had called. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had to look away, unable to bear the weight of what he had done. Kelly, Eleanor said gently. Marcus didn't know. The doctors told him I wouldn't recognize him anymore. They said his visits upset me. They lied to both of us. But he could have checked, Kelly said, and there was no venom in her voice now, just a profound sadness. He could have come once, just once, to see for himself. You're right. Marcus's voice was hoarse. I could have, I should have, and I didn't. The table fell silent. Around them, the diner hummed with the sounds of ordinary life, clinking silverware, murmured conversations, the sizzle of bacon on the grill. But in their corner booth, 3 people sat with the weight of 4 years of pain and miscommunication between them. I need to tell you something, Kelly, Eleanor said finally. Something important. Something that explains why you're sitting in this diner right now. Kelly frowned. What do you mean? What do... Eleanor looked at her son, and there was something almost guilty in her expression. Marcus, do you remember what I told you about the night staff at Sunrise Gardens? About the one person who made those years bearable? You mentioned someone, Marcus said slowly. Someone who read to you, who held your hand, but you couldn't remember her name. I couldn't remember anything clearly back then. The medication they had me on, it made everything foggy. But I remembered a feeling. I remembered being loved. Eleanor turned back to Kelly. You were the only light in 4 years of darkness, and after you left, after they took you away, I made a promise to myself. What promise? That if I ever got better, if I ever got the chance, I would find you. Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears. So when Marcus took me out of that place this morning, when I was finally lucid enough to explain what I needed, I asked him to bring me to Brooklyn. Marcus went still. Mom, you said you wanted to go to a diner, like the one where you used to work. I did, but not just any diner. Eleanor smiled, a small, secret smile. I remembered, Kelly. Not clearly, not completely, but I remembered you telling me about this place. Rosie's Diner, where you got a job after they fired you. You mentioned it during one of my lucid moments, maybe 18 months ago. You said you were working here now and that you would visit me if they let you. Kelly's hand flew to her mouth. You remembered that? Some things you don't forget, Eleanor said simply. No matter how sick you are, some people you don't forget. Marcus stared at his mother, stunned. She had asked to come to this specific diner. She had known, or hoped, that Kelly would be here. And she hadn't told him why. I didn't tell Marcus because I wasn't sure it would work, Eleanor continued, reading the confusion on her son's face. I didn't want to get your hopes up in case Kelly wasn't here anymore, in case she had moved on. But I had to try. I had to find her. You found me, Kelly whispered. After 19 months, you found me. The two women embraced, and Marcus watched with a strange mixture of emotions. Gratitude that his mother had this person who loved her so completely, shame that he had not been that person and something else. Something that felt almost like hope. Because watching Kelly hold his mother, watching the tears stream down both their faces, Marcus realized something important. The world was not as cold and transactional as he had made it. There were still people who gave love freely, without expecting anything in return. There were still connections that transcended money and status and convenience. He had spent 4 years building walls, convincing himself that check writing was the same as caring. But here, in a Brooklyn diner that probably cleared less profit in a year than he made in a day, he was witnessing what real love looked like, and it looked nothing like what he had been doing. Kelly, Marcus said, surprising himself again. When your shift ends, would you consider coming to dinner with us? My mother has missed you terribly. And I think I'd like to hear more about your time with her, about who she was during the years I wasn't there. Kelly looked at him warily, clearly unsure what to make of this man she had resented for so long. But then Eleanor squeezed her hand and nodded, and something in Kelly's expression softened. My shift ends at 2:30, she said quietly. I'll meet you outside. Marcus nodded, already mentally canceling the rest of his day. The calls to Singapore could wait. The acquisition proposal could wait. The senators could definitely wait. For the first time in years, something actually mattered more than work. And as he watched his mother and Kelly continue their tearful reunion, Marcus made a silent promise to himself. He would never again let money be a substitute for presence. He would never again convince himself that writing checks was the same as showing up. Because if a waitress earning minimum wage plus tips could love his mother more faithfully than a billionaire, then clearly something had gone very, very wrong with his priorities. And it was time to fix that. The next 3 weeks changed everything. Kelly became a fixture in the Bennett penthouse, a $4,200 square foot apartment on the Upper East Side that cost more than she would earn in 40 years of waitressing. She came every evening after her shift, still smelling faintly of coffee and bacon grease, and she would sit with Eleanor for hours. They talked about everything, the books they had read together at Sunrise Gardens, the other patients Eleanor remembered, the dreams Kelly had once had of becoming a nurse before life got in the way, the years of silence that had separated them, and the strange miracle that had brought them back together. Marcus watched from the periphery, fascinated and humbled by their connection. He had cleared his schedule entirely for the first 2 weeks, delegating everything to his COO and his army of vice presidents. For the first time in 7 years, he wasn't checking his email every 5 minutes. He wasn't calculating quarterly projections in his head during conversations. He was just present. It felt strange, foreign, like wearing someone else's clothes. But it also felt right. On the 4th evening, Kelly finally began to warm to him. They were sitting on the terrace overlooking Central Park. Eleanor had fallen asleep in her room after a long conversation about the old days, and Kelly was nursing a glass of wine that probably cost more than her weekly tips. This is surreal, she said, gesturing at the city spread out before them like a glittering carpet. I live in a 412 square foot studio in Bushwick. My view is a brick wall and sometimes a pigeon, and here you are with this. It doesn't feel like much, Marcus said quietly. The view, I mean. I've lived here for 3 years and I barely notice it anymore. Kelly looked at him, really looked at him, and Marcus felt something shift in the air between them. That's sad, she said, not having someone to share it with. I've been too busy building an empire to notice I was doing it alone. He took a sip of his wine. My mother used to tell me that success without love is just expensive loneliness. I thought she was being dramatic. She wasn't. No, she wasn't. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the city drifting up from 47 floors below. Can I ask you something personal? Kelly said finally. After everything you've done for my mother, you can ask me anything. Why did you stop visiting? I know the doctors told you it would upset her, but you're clearly not stupid. You built a billion-dollar company. Didn't some part of you suspect they were lying? Marcus set down his wine glass carefully, as if it might shatter if he gripped it too tightly. Honestly, I think I wanted to be lied to, too. He stared out at the city, unable to meet her eyes. After my dad left, my mom was everything. She worked herself half to death to give me a future. And when I finally had the power to give her everything she deserved, the best care, the best doctors, the best facility, I couldn't watch her slip away. So you ran. So I ran. He laughed bitterly. I told myself it was for her benefit, that seeing me would confuse her, that my presence would make things worse. But really, I just couldn't handle the pain of watching my mother forget who I was. Kelly was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "That's the first thing you've said that makes me think you might actually be a decent person underneath all that money." Marcus turned to look at her. In the soft light of the terrace, her face had lost some of its guardedness. She looked younger, softer, more vulnerable than she ever did in her waitress uniform. "I'm trying to be," he said. "I'm trying to learn how to actually show up for people instead of just writing checks. But I spent 4 years running a company and forgetting how to be human. It's not as easy as I thought. Nothing worthwhile ever is." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a spark of understanding, of recognition, two people who had both been shaped by loss and loneliness finding unexpected common ground. "Tell me about your mother," Marcus said. "You mentioned she was a waitress too." Kelly's expression flickered with pain, but she didn't look away. "She was. 31 years at the same diner in South Boston, 6 days a week, never called in sick." Kelly's voice grew softer. "She died when I was 15. Lung cancer. 3 months from diagnosis to the end. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was 11 years ago. I've made my peace with it." But her eyes were bright with old tears. "She's why I went into nursing. I wanted to take care of people the way the hospice nurses took care of her. They were so kind, Marcus. So patient. They held her hand when I couldn't, when it was too much for a 15-year-old to process. And that's why you cared so much about my mother." Kelly nodded. "Eleanor reminded me of her. The way she smiled even when she was in pain. The way she talked about you." She stopped, caught herself. "What did she say about me?" "She said you were her whole world, that everything she did was for you, that she would die happy knowing you had succeeded even if—" Kelly trailed off. "Even if I never visited." She never said that. She never complained, but I could see it in her eyes. Every time someone came to the facility and it wasn't you, a little light would go out. And I hated you for that, Marcus. I hated you for 4 years without ever meeting you. And now?" Kelly sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Now I think you're just as broken as the rest of us. You just have more money to hide it with." Marcus laughed, a real laugh surprised out of him. "That might be the most accurate description of my life anyone has ever given." They talked until 2 a.m. that night, about their childhoods, their dreams, their failures, about the ways loss had shaped them and the walls they had built to survive, about books and movies and music. Kelly loved 80s rock, which Marcus found unexpectedly charming, and about the future they were both afraid to imagine. Somewhere around midnight, Marcus realized he hadn't thought about work in hours. He hadn't checked his phone. He hadn't calculated profit margins or reviewed acquisition targets in his head. He had just been present, with this woman who saw through all his defenses and somehow still seemed willing to keep talking to him. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating feeling he had experienced in years. Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. Kelly stopped looking at him with barely concealed hostility. Marcus stopped treating her like a guest and started treating her like family. They developed routines: dinner together every evening, long conversations on the terrace after Eleanor went to sleep, occasional walks through Central Park on Kelly's days off. Eleanor watched this evolution with a knowing smile that made both of them uncomfortable. "She's matchmaking," Kelly whispered to Marcus one evening, after Eleanor had made yet another transparent comment about how lovely Kelly's eyes looked in the lamplight. "I noticed." Marcus couldn't help but smile. "She's not exactly subtle. Should we tell her to stop?" Marcus looked at Kelly, her hair down for once, wearing a simple blue dress that Eleanor had insisted on buying her, her green eyes bright with laughter, and felt his heart do something complicated. "Maybe not," he said quietly. "Maybe she's seeing something we're both too scared to admit." Kelly's cheeks flushed and she looked away, but she didn't deny it. The first kiss happened on a Thursday night, exactly 23 days after they met. Eleanor had gone to bed early, complaining of tiredness, and Marcus suspected she had orchestrated the early retirement to give them privacy. They were on the terrace again, their usual spot, watching the lights of the city flicker like earthbound stars. "I should go," Kelly said, standing. "Early shift tomorrow." Marcus stood too. "Let me call you a car. I can take the subway, it's fine." "Kelly." He caught her hand gently. "Please, it's 11:47 at night. Let me do this one thing." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. In the soft glow of the city lights, she looked almost ethereal. "You're different than I thought you'd be," she said softly. "When I imagined the man who abandoned his mother, I pictured someone cold. Someone who didn't care about anything but money, but you're not that person." I was. For a long time, I was exactly that person. And now? Marcus stepped closer, closing the distance between them. His heart was pounding in a way it hadn't since he was a teenager asking a girl to prom. "Now I think I'm becoming someone else. Someone I actually want to be." He lifted his hand to her cheek, giving her every opportunity to pull away. "And I think a lot of that is because of you." Kelly's breath caught. For a moment, they stood frozen, two people on the edge of something that could change everything. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, like they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. But then Marcus pulled her closer and she melted against him, and the kiss deepened into something that left them both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, Kelly's eyes were wide. "I've been wanting to do that for 3 weeks," she admitted. "Only 3 weeks?" Marcus smiled. "I've been wanting to do that since you yelled at me in the diner for being a terrible son." "I didn't yell." "You definitely yelled, and I deserved it." Kelly laughed, and the sound was the most beautiful thing Marcus had heard in years. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus looked at her. This waitress who made $2,340 a month, who lived in a 412-square-foot apartment, who had loved his mother when he couldn't, who had somehow wormed her way past every defense he had built over 4 years of isolation. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I don't want this to end, whatever this is." "Neither do I." Kelly squeezed his hand. "But your world is very different from mine, Marcus. I don't know if I belong here." "You belong wherever you want to be, and I'm hoping that includes here, with me, with my mother, with whatever mess of a life I'm trying to build." Kelly looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile without guards or defenses, and Marcus felt something in his chest expand. "Okay," she said. "Let's figure it out together." And for the first time in 4 years, Marcus felt like he had something worth more than all the money in the world. He had hope. But hope, as Kelly would soon learn, was a fragile thing. It started with an envelope. Kelly found it in her mailbox 6 weeks after that first kiss. A thick manila envelope with no return address, postmarked from Westchester. Inside were documents she had never seen before. Medical records, internal memos. A paper trail that told a story so devastating she had to read it 3 times before she could accept what she was seeing. The first document was a memo from the previous administration at Sunrise Gardens, dated 3 years and 4 months ago. Patient Eleanor Bennett, recommended treatment protocol after reviewing Mrs. Bennett's case. We recommend continuing the current sedation regimen. The patient's lucid episodes are becoming more frequent, but we believe it is in the facility's best interest to maintain the dementia diagnosis. The monthly payments from Mr. Marcus Bennett, $1,700, represent significant revenue, and any suggestion that the patient's condition is improving could result in transfer to a lower care facility. Additionally, Mrs. Bennett has been expressing desire to contact her son. We recommend intercepting all outgoing communications and ensuring the patient remains isolated from external contact that could jeopardize our financial arrangement. Kelly's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the paper. They had known. The administrators at Sunrise Gardens had known for over 3 years that Eleanor's condition was treatable. They had deliberately kept her sedated, deliberately misdiagnosed her, deliberately isolated her from the world, all to keep collecting Marcus's monthly checks. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the second document, a handwritten note stapled to a series of emails written in a familiar script that made Kelly's blood run cold. Kelly, if you're reading this, it means I finally got the courage to send what I should have sent months ago. I found these documents when I was cleaning out the old administrator's office. They were hidden in a locked drawer, but the new director gave me the key. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry for what they did to Mrs. Bennett, and I'm sorry for what they did to you. But there's something else you need to know. Something about Marcus Bennett that changes everything. Look at the third document, the emails from Mr. Bennett's personal assistant, the ones dated from 2 years ago. I'm sorry, Kelly, I truly am. Janet, night nurse, Sunrise Gardens. With trembling fingers, Kelly pulled out the third document. It was a chain of emails between Marcus's assistant and the Sunrise Gardens administration. The subject line read, "Inquiries about patient status." The first email from Marcus's assistant, "Mr. Bennett is inquiring about his mother's condition. Please provide an update on her current status and whether visits would be beneficial." The response from Sunrise Gardens. As discussed in our previous communications, visits from family members continue to agitate Mrs. Bennett. We strongly recommend maintaining the current no-contact protocol. Please assure Mr. Bennett that his mother is receiving the highest quality care. Then, a follow-up from Marcus's assistant. "Mr. Bennett would like to schedule a video call with his mother. Please arrange." The response. Unfortunately, video calls are not possible given Mrs. Bennett's current cognitive state. She does not recognize faces on screens and becomes distressed when confronted with unfamiliar technology. We will continue to provide written updates on her condition. Kelly kept reading, email after email, request after request. For 2 years, Marcus had been trying to contact his mother, and for 2 years, the administration had blocked him at every turn. He had tried. All those nights Kelly had held Eleanor's hand and listened to her cry about her absent son. All those months of resentment she had built up against the man who couldn't be bothered to visit. And he had been trying. He had been asking. He had been reaching out, again and again, only to be told that his presence would make things worse. But that still wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the final email in the chain, dated 18 months ago, from Marcus Bennett himself. "I understand that visits are not possible, but please ensure my mother knows I love her. Please tell her I think about her every day. And please, if there is ever any change in her condition, any improvement at all, contact me immediately. I would give everything I have to see her smile at me again." Below that email was a handwritten note from someone at Sunrise Gardens. "Do not respond. Do not pass along to patient. File with other Bennett correspondence." Kelly sat on her bed in her 412-square-foot apartment, surrounded by documents that shattered everything she thought she knew, and she cried. She cried for Eleanor, who had been deliberately isolated from the son who loved her. She cried for Marcus, who had been reaching out into darkness and receiving nothing but lies. And she cried for herself, because she had judged him so harshly, had hated him so completely, when he had been a victim just as much as his mother. But as her tears subsided, a new emotion began to replace the grief. Rage. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had kept a mother and son apart for profit. Someone had watched Eleanor cry for Marcus night after night and done nothing. Someone had intercepted every attempt at communication and let both of them suffer in silence. And Kelly was going to find out who. She grabbed her phone and called Marcus. "Kelly?" His voice was warm, happy. "They had dinner plans tonight. I was just about to leave the office. Should I pick you up at—" "Marcus, I need you to come to my apartment now." Something in her voice must have alarmed him. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but there's something you need to see. Something about Sunrise Gardens, about your mother, about everything." Silence on the other end. Then, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He made it in 14. When Marcus walked into Kelly's apartment, his face went pale at the sight of the documents spread across her tiny kitchen table. "Where did you get these?" he asked, picking up the first memo with hands that had started to shake. "Someone at Sunrise Gardens sent them, anonymously." Kelly watched him read, watched the color drain from his face, watched 4 years of guilt transform into something darker. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I spent years hating you for not visiting, and all along you were trying to—" "They knew." His voice was barely a whisper. "They knew she was treatable, they knew she was lucid, and they kept her sedated so I would keep paying. Yes. They told me my visits upset her. They told me she didn't recognize me anymore. They told me—" His voice broke. "I believed them. For 4 years I believed every word they said. You had no reason not to. They were medical professionals. They had credentials, facilities, reviews. You trusted them to take care of your mother. I should have checked myself." Marcus slammed his palm against the table, making Kelly jump. "I should have walked in there unannounced and seen for myself. But I was too afraid, too busy, too—" He couldn't finish. Kelly moved to stand beside him. "Marcus, this isn't your fault. They deliberately manipulated both of you. They intercepted your communications. They lied to your face. You're a victim here, not a villain. Tell that to my mother." His voice was raw. "Tell that to the woman who cried for me every night while I was signing checks and congratulating myself on being a good son. She doesn't blame you. You know that. She forgave you the moment she saw you again. But I don't forgive myself." Marcus looked at Kelly, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache. "I had $2, $3 billion. I had armies of lawyers, investigators, resources most people can't even imagine. And I couldn't protect my own mother from being abused in the place I was paying to keep her safe." Kelly didn't have an answer for that, because he was right. All the money in the world, and it hadn't protected Eleanor from the very people Marcus was paying to care for her. "What do you want to do?" Kelly asked quietly. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I want to burn that place to the ground. I want to find everyone who was involved in this and make them pay. I want—" He stopped, took a breath. "I want to tell my mother. Are you sure? This might— She deserves to know the truth. We both do." He looked at Kelly. "And then I'm going to need your help." "With what?" "Building a case, finding the people responsible, making sure no one else ever goes through what my mother went through." His eyes were hard now, focused. "I'm going to tear Sunrise Gardens apart piece by piece, and I'm going to need someone who actually knows what happened inside those walls." Kelly nodded slowly. "I'll tell you everything I remember. Every staff member, every policy, every strange thing I noticed and ignored. But Marcus—" "What?" "Your mother is happy right now. She has you back. She has me. She's building a new life. If we go after Sunrise Gardens, it's going to drag everything up again. It's going to mean lawyers and depositions and probably months of reliving the worst years of her life." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the final document, the email he had written 18 months ago, begging the administration to tell his mother he loved her, and his expression hardened. "She needs to know the truth," he said. And so does everyone else who trusted that place with their loved ones. I'm not going to let them get away with this. Not for her sake, and not for the sake of anyone else they might be hurting right now. Kelly reached out and took his hand. Then we do it together. Marcus looked at her. This woman who had spent years hating him, who had slowly learned to love him, who was now offering to stand beside him in a fight that could take months or years. Together, he agreed. But first, we tell my mother. She deserves to hear it from us. They drove to the penthouse in silence, the weight of what was coming pressing down on both of them. Eleanor was in the living room when they arrived, reading one of her beloved romance novels, looking peaceful and content. She looked up as they entered and immediately knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her book. "Marcus, Kelly, what happened?" Marcus sat beside his mother and took her weathered hands in his. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "there's something you need to know. Something about Sunrise Gardens, about why I stopped visiting, about everything." And as he began to explain, the documents, the conspiracy, the systematic cruelty that had kept them apart for 4 years, Kelly watched Eleanor's face transform from confusion to horror, to a grief so profound it seemed to age her 10 years in 10 minutes. But underneath the grief, underneath the shock and the betrayal, there was something else. There was steel. "They took 4 years from us," Eleanor said when Marcus finished, her voice quiet but fierce. "They took my son from me. They took Kelly from me. They made me think I was losing my mind when I was really just being drugged into compliance. Mom, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize." Eleanor's grip on Marcus's hands tightened. "This wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault except the people who did this." She looked up at Kelly. "Did the letter say who sent the documents? Who finally had the courage to tell the truth?" "A night nurse named Janet. I remember her. She was one of the better ones." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Janet. She used to bring me extra pudding on the nights when you weren't working, Kelly. She was kind." A pause. "Find her. Thank her. And then make sure everyone responsible pays for what they did." Marcus looked at his mother with something like awe. "You want us to go public with this?" "I want justice." Eleanor's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "Not for me. I've already lost those years and nothing will bring them back. But for everyone else still inside that place. For every family being lied to. For every patient being kept sedated so some administrator can keep collecting checks." She turned to Kelly. "You worked there. You know what it was like. Will you help my son tear them apart?" Kelly looked at this woman she loved, this fierce, resilient, unbreakable woman who had survived 4 years of deliberate cruelty and emerged with her spirit intact, and felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. "Yes," she said. "I'll help." And in that moment, the three of them became something more than a family reunited. They became a team. The lawsuit took 8 months. Marcus's legal team, 14 attorneys from 3 different firms, costing over $2 to $7 million in fees, built a case so airtight that Sunrise Gardens never stood a chance. The documents Kelly had received were just the beginning. Once investigators started digging, they found evidence of similar abuse going back nearly a decade. 17 other patients had been deliberately misdiagnosed to inflate billing. 4 had died while receiving inadequate care. And the paper trail led all the way to the executive level of the healthcare conglomerate that had purchased Sunrise Gardens. The settlement was $47 million, the largest in the state's history for nursing home abuse. More importantly, criminal charges were filed against 3 administrators and 2 doctors. The facility was shut down, and the parent company was forced to implement oversight reforms across all 37 of their properties. But for Kelly, the money and the legal victories weren't what mattered. What mattered was the day Eleanor testified. She sat in that courtroom, 74 years old and frail but absolutely unbroken, and she told her story. She talked about the fog of sedation that had stolen her clarity. She talked about crying for a son who loved her but was told to stay away. She talked about Kelly, the nursing assistant who had been her only light in the darkness, being fired for caring too much. and she talked about what it meant to wake up finally, after 4 years of being deliberately kept in a haze. "They took my time," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tears running down her weathered cheeks. "They took years I can never get back with my son. They took my friend Kelly, the only person who made me feel human. And they did it for money. They traded my life for checks. They traded my son's grief for profit margins." She paused, looking directly at the defendants. "But they didn't take everything. They didn't take my spirit. They didn't take my ability to love. And they didn't take my son." She glanced at Marcus, who was sitting in the front row with tears streaming openly down his face. "He came back. He found me. And he brought me Kelly again. So in the end they failed. Because love won. Love always wins." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people crying. Kelly, seated beside Marcus, reached over and took his hand. He squeezed back, hard enough to hurt, and she understood. Some moments were too big for words. Some pain was too deep to articulate. All you could do was hold on to the people you loved and hope that was enough. After the verdict, after the cameras and the reporters and the tearful embraces, Marcus took Kelly and Eleanor to dinner. Not at a fancy restaurant. At Rosie's Diner, where everything had started. Doris, Kelly's former manager, seated them in the corner booth where Eleanor had first recognized her 19 months ago. "On the house," Doris said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "All of it, whatever you want." Kelly ordered French toast. Eleanor ordered a Denver omelet. Marcus ordered 3 eggs scrambled with wheat toast. And when Kelly raised an eyebrow, he smiled. "I've been paying attention," he said. "This is what people order when they're happy." They ate in comfortable silence, the weight of the past 8 months slowly lifting from their shoulders. The lawsuit was over. The bad guys were going to prison. And somehow, impossibly, the 3 of them had come through it stronger than before. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said, setting down her fork, "about what comes next." Marcus and Kelly exchanged glances. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I mean that I'm 74 years old. I've spent 4 years in a fog and 8 months in courtrooms. I want to do something with whatever time I have left." She looked at Kelly. "Something that matters. What did you have in mind?" Eleanor smiled. That mischievous smile that Marcus remembered from childhood. The one that usually meant she was about to do something unexpected. "I want to start a foundation for nursing home residents who don't have family, who don't have anyone checking on them, making sure they're being treated right." She reached across the table and took both their hands. "I want to hire people like Kelly used to be, people who actually care, and send them into facilities to be advocates, watchdogs, angels." Marcus's eyes widened. "Mom, that would cost—" "I know exactly what it would cost. I'm old, not stupid." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "But my son is a billionaire who has been looking for ways to make up for lost time. And my future daughter-in-law is a trained nursing assistant who knows exactly what these residents need." Kelly choked on her coffee. "Future daughter-in-law?" "Oh, please." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "I've seen the way you two look at each other. It's only a matter of time. Might as well start planning now." Marcus's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "Mom, we've only been together for long enough. Trust me. When you know, you know." Eleanor's eyes softened. "And I know. I've been watching you both for almost 2 years now. You're meant to be together. The only question is whether my stubborn son is going to admit it before I'm too old to dance at your wedding." Kelly looked at Marcus, and despite the embarrassment coloring both their faces, something warm bloomed in her chest. Because Eleanor was right. She had known it for months, even if she'd been too scared to say it out loud. "The foundation is a wonderful idea," Kelly said, deliberately changing the subject. "And I would love to help. But Eleanor, are you sure you're up for this? It would be a lot of work." "I'm sure." Eleanor's voice was firm. "Those 4 years in Sunrise Gardens taught me what it feels like to be forgotten, to be invisible, to be treated like a billing number instead of a human being. If I can spare even one person that experience, it will be worth every minute of effort." Marcus looked at his mother, this incredible woman who had worked 3 jobs to raise him, who had survived 4 years of abuse and emerged fighting, who was now 74 years old and planning her next adventure, and felt his heart overflow with love and admiration. "Then we'll do it," he said, "together, the three of us." Kelly nodded. The Eleanor Bennett Foundation, for dignity in elder care. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "That's too fancy. I was thinking something simpler, something that captures what it's really about." "What?" Eleanor looked at Kelly, then at Marcus, and her smile widened. "The Never Forgotten Foundation. Because everyone deserves to be remembered. Everyone deserves to have someone who shows up." And in that moment, sitting in a corner booth at Rosie's Diner, surrounded by the smell of coffee and bacon and memories both painful and precious, the three of them made a silent promise. They would never forget, and they would never let anyone else be forgotten either. 8 months later, Kelly woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of rain against the windows. She reached across the bed, her fingers finding the warmth where Marcus had been sleeping moments before. The sheets still held his scent, expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him. And she smiled, still not quite able to believe this was her life. "You're supposed to be resting," she called out, her voice thick with sleep. "It's Sunday." Marcus appeared in the doorway of their bedroom in the penthouse that now felt like home, wearing the old MIT t-shirt she'd bought him at a thrift store for $7 because she thought it was funny that a billionaire didn't own anything casual. "I made breakfast," he said, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "Well, I attempted breakfast. The eggs are creative." Kelly laughed, pushing herself up against the pillows. "You've been a billionaire CEO for 15 years and you still can't cook eggs. I have people for that. You have me now, and I'm going to teach you if it kills us both." He crossed the room and handed her a mug, prepared exactly the way she liked it, with just a splash of milk and no sugar. Some things he had learned. "Mom's already up," he said, settling onto the bed beside her. "She's on the phone with Janet, going over next month's facility visits." The Never Forgotten Foundation now has 47 volunteer advocates in 12 states. In 8 months, Kelly shook her head in wonder. Your mother is a force of nature. She learned from the best. Marcus leaned over to kiss her forehead. "Speaking of which, she wants to know if you've finished your nursing certification yet." Kelly groaned. "I have 3 more classes to finish. Tell her to stop asking. She says she needs you fully credentialed before the foundation can hire you as director of patient advocacy." "Tell her I'm working on it. Tell her yourself. She's making waffles." Kelly smiled, setting down her coffee and reaching for Marcus's hand. Some mornings she still couldn't believe this was real. 18 months ago she'd been a waitress earning $2,340 a month, living in a 412-square-foot apartment, carrying $47,000 in student loan debt and a heart full of grief for the patient she'd been forced to abandon. Now she was engaged to a billionaire who had paid off her loans without asking, living in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, and helping to run a foundation that was changing lives across the country. But the money wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the family she'd found. "Marcus," she said softly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if your mother hadn't remembered this diner? If she hadn't asked you to bring her here that day?" He was quiet for a moment. "I think about it all the time. How close we came to never meeting. How different everything would have been." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes soft. "But I also think that somehow we would have found each other anyway. Some people are just meant to be in your life." That's surprisingly romantic for a man who used to think love was inefficient. "I had a good teacher." He leaned in and kissed her properly, slow and sweet, and Kelly melted into him the way she always did. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling. "Your mother is going to yell at us for letting breakfast get cold. My mother is going to be thrilled that we're having a moment. She's been planning our wedding since approximately 3 days after we met." Speaking of which, Kelly reached for the nightstand and pulled out a small envelope. "I was going to wait until tonight, but I can't." Marcus took the envelope with a puzzled expression. Inside was a photograph, grainy and black and white, barely recognizable as anything at all. "Is this?" The doctor confirmed it yesterday. 8 weeks. Kelly's voice was shaking slightly. I wanted to tell you and Eleanor together, but I couldn't wait. I'm pregnant, Marcus. We're going to have a baby. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He just stared at the photograph, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at her and his eyes were bright with tears. We're going to have a baby, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. We're going to have a baby. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, and Kelly felt his tears hot against her neck. The man who had spent 4 years running from love, who had convinced himself that money was the same as presents, who had almost lost everything because he was too afraid to show up. That man was crying with joy at the thought of becoming a father. I'm going to be there, Marcus said fiercely, pulling back to look at her. Every moment, every step. I'm not going to miss a single thing. I know. Kelly touched his face gently. That's not who you are anymore. It's not, he agreed, and I have you to thank for that. You and my mother. You showed me what it means to actually love someone, to show up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And from the kitchen, Eleanor's voice called out, if you two lovebirds are done canoodling, the waffles are getting cold. Kelly laughed, wiping her own tears. Should we tell her? Together. Marcus helped her out of bed, keeping her hand in his. We tell her together, and then we start planning. A nursery, baby names, all of it. You're going to want to throw money at this. I'm absolutely going to want to throw money at this. I'm thinking solid gold cribs, diamond-encrusted pacifiers, a nanny from every country in the world. Kelly rolled her eyes. You're ridiculous. I'm happy. He kissed her again, quick and sweet. For the first time in my life, I'm actually genuinely happy. And it's all because a waitress in a Brooklyn diner cared more about my mother than I did. I didn't care more, Kelly corrected softly. I just showed up. That's all any of us can do, really. Show up for the people we love. Marcus nodded, and there was a peace in his expression that hadn't been there 18 months ago. The guilt was still there, would probably always be there to some extent, but it no longer defined him. He had learned to forgive himself, the way his mother had forgiven him. He had learned that making mistakes didn't make you a bad person, only refusing to learn from them did. Come on, he said, leading her toward the kitchen. Let's go tell my mother she's going to be a grandmother. She's going to lose her mind. Kelly smiled, squeezing his hand as they walked through the penthouse, past the terrace where they'd had their first real conversation, past the living room where Eleanor read her beloved romance novels, past the wall of photographs that now included pictures of all three of them together. At court after the verdict, at Rosie's diner for the anniversary of their meeting, at the Never Forgotten Foundation launch party surrounded by volunteers and advocates and families who had been helped by their work. A family built not by blood but by choice, by love, by the simple act of showing up. In the kitchen, Eleanor was indeed making waffles, humming an old song that Kelly recognized from the nights she'd spent reading to her at Sunrise Gardens. She looked up as they entered and her eyes immediately narrowed. You two have that look, she said, the look that means something's happening. What are you keeping from me? Kelly and Marcus exchanged glances. Then together they said, You're going to be a grandmother. The waffle iron sizzled, forgotten, as Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth. Tears sprang to her eyes. The same tears she'd cried at court, at the foundation launch, at every moment of joy that had filled these past 18 months. A baby, she whispered. A baby. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and pulled them both into a fierce embrace. Her son, her future daughter-in-law, her family reborn from the ashes of 4 stolen years. I thought I lost everything, Eleanor said, her voice muffled against their shoulders. When they put me in that place and took my memories, I thought my life was over. But look at us now. Look at what we have. Kelly held on tighter, feeling Marcus's arms around both of them, feeling the warmth and love that filled this kitchen on a rainy Sunday morning. This is what it's about, she said softly. Not the money, not the lawsuits, not even the foundation. This. Family. Being together. actually showing up for each other. Speaking of which, Marcus said, pulling back with a suspicious expression, "Mom, are you burning those waffles?" Eleanor swore and rushed back to the waffle iron, and the moment dissolved into laughter and chaos and the ordinary magic of a family breakfast. But underneath it all, the truth remained. Some things you never forget. Some people you never let go. And love, real love, the kind that shows up and stays and fights, always, always wins.